Pseudo-class. Things are going to get very interesting from now on as we go on with pseudo-classes and further discuss its types. Before we get to its definition, let's first understand why you need pseudo-class. So if you look at these anchor tags, one is a normal anchor tag and another is having CSS pseudo-class applied. Now when the mouse is rolled over the normal anchor tag, there is nothing happening to it. But when I roll over to this anchor tag, which is having pseudo-class, can you see the difference? You probably notice the shadow effect, and also you can see there is some color. All these are special states of the element. So when you want to deal with special states of an element, you have to use pseudo-classes. You can also see the code where in the first case just the class is given, whereas in the second case you can also see colon and hover, which is actually a pseudo class. This also means every time you give pseudo class, you will have a colon to separate the selector from the state. So you have the selector, colon, the state, the special state like hover or maybe focus. So this is what pseudo class is all about. There are various pseudo classes available and we will be covering mostly the important ones as we move on. Linguistic pseudo classes will help you select the elements based on their language or script direction. So when you want the elements to be in a specific direction or in a specific language, then this pseudo class is considered. Let's take a look at the example. If I give a div and inside this div I give the dir, that is the direction attribute, which has basically three values, that is RTL, LTR and auto. The RTL is used for targeting right to left elements or text. The LTR is used for targeting left to right elements or text. And the auto actually follows the default. So I will say RTL here in the direction, giving a span here in which I'll say this is right hand side. Similarly, I'll give another div with the LTR value, giving span, this is a left hand side. Now the linguistic pseudo class provides us two pseudo classes to deal with. They are the colon dir, that is the direction pseudo class, and the language lang pseudo class. The direction pseudo class, which we will see right now, helps you select the elements based on their direction. So in the style, if I give colon dir and in the brackets if I say RTL, that is right to left, it will select the right hand side span element. The direction pseudo class requires one parameter which represents the text direction. So giving the parameter here is mandatory. You cannot leave it blank. I'll open the brackets and will define font size and color. Now if I check the browser, you can see there is no output displayed. Well, because clearly Chrome does not support this, but when I switch to Firefox, you can see the output. So while working with pseudo classes, check their compatibility with different browsers first. Also by default, the text direction will be left to right if not specified. Okay, so moving on, let's check the lang pseudo class. The language pseudo class is used to select the elements based on their language which they are determined. So let me give lang attribute here and I'll give the value FR, which stands for French. And to the second division, I will give lang as EN, which is English. I also want to quote a point here that as a developer, you must know few ISO language codes like FR, EN, IT, ZH or RU. You never know, they might come in handy in certain situations. Also, we will be practicing few in forthcoming sections, so you will have clear idea of the real world scenario as well. Alright, if I want to style this element on the basis of the language, I'll give styling here saying language fr and language en. Here also giving parameter is mandatory, so you can see in the browser how we have selected the element on the basis of their language. Note that the value which you give in lang attribute will always be in two-letter language code or combination of two-letter codes. Now let's talk about relative questions. So the first question is, from this code, how will you select all the paragraphs which are on the right hand side? Very simple. To select all the paragraphs which are at the right hand side, you'll write the CSS code. First of all, paragraphs, I'll say P, then putting a colon, I'll say dir, the direction. In the brackets, I'm going to say RTL. This will actually select all the paragraphs having direction is equal to RTL. Then you open the curly brackets and you can write the style you want. The second question is, explain which elements will this CSS code be applied to. So in this code, the div greater than p will select the paragraph which is direct child of the div tag, right? Because the greater than sign is for child selector. Then the colon direction LTR will select the paragraph which is assigned left direction in the document. So the div greater than p colon dir and LTR in the bracket will select this paragraph which is the fifth paragraph. Generally, location pseudo classes are used when there are hyperlinks involved in the document. Let's check few practical examples so you can understand it more clearly. The first location pseudo class we will see is colon any link. This pseudo class selector will select the hyperlinks regardless of whether they are visited or not, and it will match all the anchor tags which have href attribute in them. So when I say visited or not, it means, let me open the browser first of all and let me search learn CSS here. You can see various links here which have the color blue as default when the browser loads. So this shows that the links are not visited yet. When I select one link and let me revisit the search page, you can see the color of the link which is visited has now changed. So the link is now in the visited state. Alright, so let's take a look at an example now. I will say div and inside I will give 2 or maybe 3 anchor tags. These two will contain the href attribute and last one is just the placeholder but still an anchor tag. Now to add styles to them, I will simply use the element selector here. I will say A and will define color attribute. In the browser you can see all the anchor tags are styled now. If I use the anyLink pseudo class here, you can see the last anchor tag is ignored because the anyLink will select only those links which have the href attribute, or in other words, it's a proper link. Now let's see link and visited pseudo classes. These two are also part of location pseudo classes. So let me add few more links here which are the login page, home page, about us and contact us page respectively. Now if I want to highlight those links which are not visited by the user, for that I will use the link pseudo class. So link will select all the anchor tags which are not yet visited. Here in the CSS, let me remove the styling which we saw earlier and I will give anchor that is a colon link. Now I will open the brackets and let me define a color to it. Similarly, I will use the visited pseudo class as well. I'll say a colon visited. The visited pseudo class is used to select those links which are already visited by the user. So let me go ahead and give the color here as well. I'll simply say the gray color. Now let's check the browser. You can see all the links are displayed in link styled color as they are not visited. Now when I start to click them one by one, you can see their color changes as they fall into the visited category. So this is what the link and visited pseudo classes are used for. Now let's move to the target pseudo class. So as the name says, this pseudo class is used to target the unique element which has the matching ID as the URL. So here in the code, I'll define a section, and inside I will write 4 paragraphs, each having unique IDs. Now in the division where we have given links, I will add 4 new links. I'll give the link references same as the ID name of the below given paragraphs. Also let me give heading to this division and section. Alright, now for the CSS I will give here p:target. P because we want to target the paragraphs when the links are selected. I will give few rules here: color, the background color, the border and the radius. Now in the browser you can see the links are displayed. Let me select the link and you can see the paragraph is highlighted. So there is a relation established between the paragraph and the link. Similarly, if I select this link, you can see it highlights the respective paragraph. As we have passed the paragraph ID name inside the href, it will target the paragraphs when we click the link. If you want to target the particular text inside these paragraphs, you can do that as well. Let's say I want this text to be targeted in all these paragraphs. So for that I will give span here. You can also give maybe italic, that is I, or bold B if you want text to appear in a different format. Anyways, now in the CSS I will write p:target and span. So you can also add elements like this when you want certain elements to be targeted as well. I will give few rules here. Let's say color, font size and the style. Now if you look at the browser, when I select the link, you can see it highlights the paragraph as well as the text which is part of the span. So this is how you work with location pseudo classes. Again, to summarize, we learned the AnyLink, link, visited and target pseudo classes which fall under the location pseudo class. Now let's talk about questions and assignments. So the first assignment I am giving is create the menu and on click of the link display the respective details using the target pseudo class. So in the body, first we will define a heading. I'll say h1, giving the heading here. Now I'll create a division and inside I will give 2 anchor tags. Link names will be HTML and CSS. Reference we will give in a moment. Let me give class to this div. I'll say select-menu. Now I will create another division and inside I will give the paragraph. I want this text to be highlighted differently, so I will give span here. Also let me give ID name as HTML to this division. Similarly for the CSS link, I'll copy this div and paste it here. And I'll change ID to CSS and let me change the paragraph content. Alright, so let's give the reference now. I'll say #HTML and #CSS. So our page looks like this. Now let's add some styling to it, starting with the body tag. Let me set black background to it. Now h1, I will add color and alignment to it. Then we'll select the div which has paragraphs in it. So I will say .select-menu space div, giving properties, color, display, border, radius and padding. Next we'll select the links. So I'll say .select-menu space A, that is anchor. You can also write just A. There is nothing wrong with that. It's just that I'm being more specific, which is a good practice in a way. Okay, so firstly I'll give text decoration none. This property will remove the underline from the links, which by default gets generated on any link defined inside the HTML document. Then I will give few more properties. Finally, we'll use the target pseudo class on this div. So I'll say dot select dash menu div colon target, and inside I'll define few properties like display, margin, padding, font style, size and color. I also want to highlight the span, so I will say span here and we'll give color to it. Now let's check the browser. Let me click on the HTML link, selecting the CSS link now, and there we have the output. The second question is, how will you apply CSS to visited links? Well, we use the colon visited, that is the visited pseudo class, with an anchor tag and apply the CSS rules. So once a link is visited, whatever you have configured with the visited pseudo class, that will be applied. The third question is, how can you remove the underline from anchor tag links? Well, it's very simple. You just have to use the text decoration colon none. That is, you assign none to text decoration, and that will remove the underlines of anchor tag. User action pseudo classes are by far the most important and widely used pseudo classes. As this pseudo class requires some interaction, some activity performed by the user on the elements in order for them to be applied, such as the hover effect or the focus effect. So these effects will only trigger when the user rolls over the mouse on the element, or maybe it receives the cursor or a focus. That's why it is known as user action pseudo classes. First pseudo class in this category is the hover pseudo class. So let's see it practically. In the body, I will simply define a button. In the browser, you can see the button. Now let's give CSS. I'll say here button and open the brackets. I'll define how the button should look. I'll give width, margin, padding, color and font weight, background color, border and its radius. Let me give text transform property. You can see various values it holds. So by using this property, you can specify how your text should look, whether it should be in uppercase or lowercase. I will set it to uppercase. If you take a look at the browser, you can see how the button looks. Now it's time to apply the hover effect. I'll say button colon hover. Now whatever property I define inside this hover will be triggered when I roll the mouse, that is hover the mouse over the button. This is what the hover pseudo class does. When the user interacts with an element with a mouse pointer, the hover effect gets triggered. I'll give shadow property here. I'll say box shadow. It takes up to 5 values including color. Right now I'm giving 0 to the first 4 values so that you can understand what each value will do when I give random values instead of 0. The first 4 values are used to represent the horizontal shadow, that is offset X, vertical shadow, that is offset Y, blur radius and the spread radius, and the 5th value as color. So if I give 10 pixels to the offset X, you can see what hover effect it gives. Now if I give 10 pixels to offset Y, you can see the shadow is applied downwards. Similarly, if I give 10 pixels to blur radius, you can see the different effect applied. Giving 10 pixels to spread radius now, and you can see the area the shadow covers. Now let me go ahead and define values the way I want. So the hover effect you can see on the browser right now. Let's make it more defined. I'll add inset here. Now the inset is used to give the shadow inside the button as well. Let me give 4 values again to create a glowing effect. I'll also add a border here. Now let's check the output, and when I roll over the mouse you can see the hover effect. This gives you the idea about what the hover effect is, and the :hover, that is pseudo class, will help you to handle these kind of situations in practical world. Let's talk about an assignment or a question. The assignment is create a link and apply hover effects as you can see in the output. Let's do it together. I'll start by defining a division inside the body. Now we want a link, so I will give an anchor tag inside this division. Now let's give CSS. Starting with the body tag, let me set black background to it. Now align the division to center. I'll give text align and margin property to this div. I'll give styling to the anchor tag and box shadow first, color, border radius, font size and family, and let me also give text decoration, and that will be none. Now let's apply the hover effect. I'll give color and again the box shadow. Now when I roll the pointer over to the link you can see the hover effect. If you wish to add some transition to it, you can do that by giving the transition rule to anchor, though we will be learning transition at a later stage as well, but quickly, it's easy to understand. Let me give transition here and just the timing, I'll say 0.8 seconds. Now when I take the mouse pointer to the link, you can see the transition hover effect. Now we will be seeing the active pseudo class, which also falls in the user action pseudo class category. So when an element is applied with the active pseudo class, that element will get activated when the user clicks or presses down the mouse button on it. I will continue the code which we saw in the previous lecture. So here if I just remove the hover and add active, now when I roll over the mouse on the button you can see the glow effect is gone. But when I press the button you can see the effect is being displayed. And at the same time when I release the button, then the effect is gone. Not only that, active pseudo class also gets triggered when you press the button with the help of spacebar. Let me move to the button by pressing tab. Now when I press spacebar you can see the active pseudo class is getting triggered. But the same thing won't work on the anchor tags, that is links. Let me change to anchor tag instead of a button, and I'll also change that in the CSS as well. Now when I press the tab and space you can see the active pseudo class is no longer getting selected. But when I click on the link you can see the class getting triggered. So this is how the active pseudo class works. In order to view the effect of the active pseudo class, the element needs to be selected, like button pressed, maybe the space bar on the button, or when it is a link or similar element, the mouse button needs to be pressed. Let's talk about the question. So where do you think the active pseudo class is useful? When you want to apply the CSS on elements which are active, that is, the action is being performed on it when the mouse button is pressed on them, or when the enter or space bar like keys are pressed. In such cases, you see that the active pseudo class will be a great help. The second question is, how is the active pseudo class is different from the hover pseudo class? Well, active means some action is getting or being performed on the element, whereas hover is just about the roll over. You just move the mouse over the element. That's what hover is. And active, where some action is being taken on it, like button is pressed, maybe space bar or enter key is pressed for that element. The focus pseudo class is very similar to the active pseudo class. The only difference is that in focus pseudo class, the element has to be selected once to activate the focused state, while in active pseudo class, the element maintains the active state till the user maintains the clicked or pressed state. Let's understand it by seeing an example. I'll be using the same code which we saw in the previous lecture. Here, instead of active, I'll say focus. Now when I click on the button, you see the focus being triggered. And when I click anywhere on the screen, you can see the focus state is no longer triggered. Let's see one more example which shows the difference between active and focus pseudo classes. I'll add another button and will give class names to both of them. Now in the CSS, I'll give focus to this button and active to the other button. Now let's check the output. As we have seen in the previous lecture, I'll press Tab to put the active cursor on the element. You can see the first button is getting highlighted as it has the focus pseudo class applied, and when I press Tab again, you can see there is no effect displayed because this button has active class applied. So I'll press space and hold it. You see the button is getting highlighted. Now when I release the space bar, the effect is gone, which means the active class is no longer applied. Not only on buttons but on links as well. If I change these buttons to anchor tags, and now if I press Tab, you can see the first link is getting focused as it has the focus class. But now if I press Tab again, there is no effect displayed on the second link despite pressing the space bar. But when I click on the link, you can see the active class being triggered. So in focus pseudo class, when the user clicks or selects the element, the focus gets triggered until the user selects another element. Now I'm going to give you an assignment. Create a form and add the focus effect on the fields on getting selected. I hope you have tried it. Let's also see the solution together. Okay, so I have boilerplate code defined here already. Now inside body, I'll give heading first and then we'll give the form tag. We'll just add the name and email input tabs. So for that, first I will give an unordered list, and in the li, I'll give a label for name and an input with type text and a placeholder message. Similarly, for the email, I'll give a label inside the li and an input with type email and again a placeholder message. Let me also give a button. I'll say input with type submit. Now I will give some CSS style to the form, starting with the body tag. Let me set black background to it. Now heading, I'll give the alignment to text and let's define font size and color. Let's also apply some style to the label. I'll give color, size and display as inline block. Next, I want to apply some style on the form. I'll give margin equals 0 and auto. Margin property takes up to 4 values, that is top and bottom margin, left and right margin. Here I have given 2 values. The first value will be applied to top and bottom margin and the second value will be applied to left and right margin. Okay, also giving the width, padding, border and border radius. Now if I look at the form, all the fields are quite joined, so let me add some space between them. I'll give form li plus li using the adjacent selector here to select the adjacent list, that is the li of first li, and inside I'll give margin top as I want to add space from the top. Also, I don't want the bullets, as we have used the allies here. The bullets are by default getting displayed, so I'll remove them. I'll say UL, and inside I'll give list style equals none. Let me increase the font size of the input, and finally adding the focus pseudo class to the input. I'll give background color, and let's save this and check the browser. Now when I select any field, you can see the focus effect is getting triggered. So this is a kind of practical use of focus pseudo class we often see in the real world scenario. Moving on to the next pseudo class is the user action category, and that is the focus within pseudo class. The focus within pseudo class is similar to the focus pseudo class, but the only difference is that the focus within pseudo class is used for focusing the descendants or child elements of the parent element. Let's take a look at an example. I will create a form. I'll define a form tag and will give a class name here. Let me give h1. I will give a div with class name myDiv, and inside I'll give a label with an input having type text and a placeholder message. Similarly, I will create another div with the same class name. So let me copy this division and paste it here. I'll change the label and input type to email. Let's also give few radio buttons. I'll create a div with the same class name which we are using, that is myDiv. I'll give label here, naming it occupation, giving 3 radio buttons named as business, job and self-employed. Finally, I am giving a submit button. So I'll say input with type submit. Alright, so we are ready with the form. Let's add CSS styles now. First, I'll change the appearance of the document by giving background color, font family and color inside body. I want to align the form, so I'll give text align to form. Similarly, I'll also give some properties to division. I'll give margin, padding, border and the border radius. Let me also give the focus within pseudo class to the division. I'll say dot myDiv colon focus dash within, and let's give some background color and border. Now let me just explain the scenario which I have created. I have this form tag and inside there are various elements, correct? So the form tag becomes the parent element and elements inside are the child of the form. The focus within pseudo class which we have given to the division will be triggered whenever any of the child elements gets selected, that is any of the divs. So in the browser, when I select any field, you can see the focus within class getting activated and the effect is displayed. When I click outside the form, you can see the effect is gone. But again, when I select any field, this time I will press tab to select the field and you can see the focus within pseudo class gets triggered. So you won't be able to target individual elements unless that element is nested with few more elements which become children for that element. This is how you use the focus within pseudo class. Now let's talk about relative questions. Explain a practical scenario where you can make use of focus within. Okay, so let's create an example where I want to display the prompt message whenever the field gets selected. For that, I'll first give a div with the class name as container. Inside, I want a password field, so I'll give an input with type password and a placeholder message as well. Now I will give another div with class prompt message, and here I will simply pass the message. In the browser, you can see the message getting displayed. Now what I want to do is, by using the focus within pseudo class, I want to display this message when the field is selected. So in the CSS, I'll first hide the message. I'm going to say the class name, that is prompt dash message. I'll set display to none. This will hide the message as you can see in the browser. Now I'm going to use the focus within class on the parent div. So let me say container colon focus dash within. And also I want to display the message, so giving the class name prompt dash message here as well. Let me give few styling. I'll say display and color. So in the browser you can see when I select the field, the message is getting displayed. The second question is, how is the focus different from the focus within? Well, when using the focus pseudo class, you have to keep in mind that you will be targeting individual elements or the elements which share the same class names. Focus will not allow you to select all the children of some parent element. But when it comes to the focus within pseudo class, you have a privilege to select the child, that is the descendants elements within the parent element. For example, the code which we saw just now, if I add focus to the form, you can see on the browser nothing happens because you cannot target all the elements with this class. But instead, if I write input, now you can see the focus effect when I select any field, because now I am instructing the browser to focus on specific fields. Alright, so now we will be moving to the input pseudo classes. All these pseudo classes are categorized as input pseudo classes, as these pseudo classes relate to the form or input elements, and they also enable selecting the elements based on the HTML attributes. So let's start with the very basic yet important input pseudo class, that is enabled and disabled. The enabled pseudo class represents any enabled element on the HTML document, and also if the element is enabled, it shows the activated signs like you can click on or set focus on it or maybe type into. The disabled class is exactly the opposite of the enabled pseudo class, that is, it cannot be activated. Consider a scenario where you have a field to select the age and a button which says proceed to vote. Now if the entered age is less than 18 years, the button will get disabled, that is, it won't let you proceed further. And if the age is greater than 18 years, the button stays the same, that is, stays in enabled state. So this is how the enabled and disabled looks like. Suppose there can be another scenario where there are few fields and they are dependent on each other. It means without entering the field details, you cannot move on to the next field. That is, the rest of the fields stay disabled. So with the use of enabled and disabled pseudo classes, you can programmatically enable or disable user input fields with the help of CSS. Let's create an example and try these pseudo classes. I will create a form. Let me give a label, name, an input with type text and a placeholder message. Similarly, let me create 3 more labels, last name, email, and city along with their input. Now let's create a button as well. Alright, so in the CSS, let me just apply the enabled pseudo class to the input. I'll give background, color, border radius, margin and padding here. So when I open the browser, you can see the styling which represents that the inputs are enabled right now. Now, if I want few elements to be disabled, you may think for that just replace enabled with disabled and get the job done, right? But this won't work. As you can see in the browser, the fields are still enabled. To disable the fields, there is an additional attribute you will have to give to the input, and that is disabled attribute. So this will make the field disabled, and if you want to style that field, you can use the disabled pseudo class. Let me give disabled attributes to these fields. Now when I check the browser, you can see the fields are disabled. Even if I try to click on them, it won't let me enter. Normally, the input fields are programmatically enabled or disabled with the help of JavaScript at runtime. But here, as we are understanding these pseudo classes, we are changing them at design time with the CSS code. So again, the disabled pseudo class is used to select the elements which are disabled, and disabled means you are not allowed to type anything or select those elements. You may have seen or come across some situations where there are certain text fields inside a form which cannot be edited, that is, they are read-only. On the other hand, elements like H1, paragraph, divisions which are not editable at all can also be made editable. In this lecture, we will see how you can make a field read-only or force an element to be editable or typeable. Let's check this practically. Inside body, I'll give few inputs. Let me give input tag here with type text and a placeholder. Now let me copy and paste this 3 more times. In the browser, you see the inputs. Let's first try to display them properly. So inside style, I'll first change the appearance of the document. I'll give background color, font style and color. Now I'll say input and we'll give display property as flex. We are going to discuss flex in detail when the right time comes, but at the moment let me give some margin, width, border and the border radius. Alright, so now you can see the inputs are displayed properly. Right now all the inputs are editable, which means you are allowed to type inside them, as you can see. This is the default state in every input. But let's say you want to make few inputs read only. For that, there is an attribute provided by HTML and it is the read only attribute. By giving read only attribute inside any element, you can change them to read only. Let me give read only to this first and third input. Now if I try to click them, you can see it no longer allows me to type. If you wish to give some predefined value inside them which cannot be edited, you can use the value attribute like this, where I give the value here saying this is read only. Now if you check the browser, you can see it's a read only input because I have given the read only attribute there. There is another attribute which does the opposite of read only, and that is the content editable attribute. Using this attribute, you can make elements like paragraphs or even divisions or headings editable. That is, you can make these elements typeable fields. How? Let's see that. I'll give a div here and we'll define a paragraph inside. And I'll give text saying this is an editable paragraph. At the moment, you see that I cannot select in the browser. It won't allow me to type anything. But when I give the content editable attribute, you can see I can now edit the paragraph from the browser itself. Even you can make a division as editable. So if I remove this paragraph and make this as a division, and let me give margin, padding, background color, border, color, giving the border radius, font size and width. In the browser you can see now the division, and when I try to write something inside division, you can see that it allows me to type because of the content editable attribute. So this is how you can use the read only and content editable attribute. Usually when you want to represent these attributes with CSS, there are specific pseudo classes available for read only and writable elements, which we see in the next lecture. Let's talk about few relative questions. How can you make any HTML element read-only? Well, you just give the read-only attribute and the element goes uneditable. That means you are not allowed to type anything inside those fields. The second question is, how can you make a non-editable HTML element editable? So again, the content editable is the attribute which makes any element editable. Though there are few exceptions, but most of the HTML elements become editable with the content editable attribute. Now let's look at read-only and read-write input pseudo classes. As their name says, the read-only pseudo class is used when you want to select the field which are read-only, whereas with read-write, it allows selecting the editable fields. We will look at the same example which we saw in the previous lecture. So to give the read-only pseudo class, I'll give the element name on which I want to apply the pseudo class. I'll say input : read only. This will select all the elements having read only attribute. Let me give some properties. I'll give background color, border, color and font style. Let me open the browser and you can see the input with read only attribute is being targeted. This pseudo class only works for the elements having the read only attribute. So if I remove the read only attribute from the input, you can see the input is no longer being targeted. So the pseudo classes are used for selecting or targeting specific elements. You cannot change the normal flow of the elements with them. Pseudo classes are selectors. They are used for selecting the elements that are in the specific state. Now let's see the read-write pseudo class. This pseudo class is used to select the elements which are writable. So if I give this pseudo class with input and add a background color and border to it, you can see all the input except for the read only are being selected, because by default all the inputs are of course writable. Now if I give comma and div, it also selects the div because div has the content editable attribute. If I remove this attribute, you can see that it no longer targets the division. So to summarize, the read-only pseudo class will select those elements which contain the read-only attribute, and the read-write pseudo class will select the elements which are writable or editable, as well as the elements containing the content editable attribute.